Holly, will you make me a host so I can share my screen?
I will do that. I am so excited to introduce um, Krista Samaras and I are close friends now and have been working together for, oh gosh, I don't know, 6 years, 7 years now. She has been a total inspiration to me for so many reasons, and I'm pumped to have her here to talk to you guys about the research that she has done. She'll tell you a little bit about herself. I'll let her do that, except that I do want to say this information is critical. It is so important for, what we do at Ready, Set, Row, why we do what we do, some of the data that informs what I do. And I'm excited for you guys to learn it. Parents, coaches, athletes, I think it's important for everyone. And we have done a bravery training session at every dev team since the first one in 2016. And so we have some data there that we can talk a little bit about. If you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll try to read through those to be able to, moderate those and get those to Krista if we need to interject them, or we'll do them at the end. So we want to have an open discussion about it. So you guys feel free to ask any questions that you have. And with that, I will turn it over to Krista Samaras. Get ready. Hold on to your seats, team.
Hello, everybody. I got crazy hair. I got crazy lighting. That's just going to have to be what we deal with. For those of you out there without your camera on, I'd of course love to have your camera on. Gives me a little bit more to play with in the audience, but I am going to be going through, understand if you're multitasking, totally openly multitask. I'm going to be going through the screen that you can see. Holly, can you see? I'm going to reshare, sorry.
I can see it, sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, we got it
now.
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, so I have a lot of information. We've found a lot of really cool things out. I'm basically going to tell you them as fast as possible, but also be animated and amazing so you can get the story part of it, and then we'll have tons of questions. I think if you have a question along the way, like shout out, raise your hand, pop a question in the Q&A. Holly will be monitoring that, and we can and talk through it. So we oftentimes call this the case for fear, because when I went into this starting of a company, I said, oh, I'll just call it Brave Enterprises. I love bravery. It's so cool. When I think about my own history as an athlete, bravery was the distinguishable characteristic that had me crushing it on the field and then off the field. But when I actually started studying bravery, I very quickly found out that the definition of bravery is action in the face of fear, and fear became the critical element. So it actually became the thing I was most interested in. Okay, people, I just want to make sure you know sort of our language here. So I'm going to be both like talking about our pedagogy, how we coach things, how we organize things, and also what we found. But everything always rolls into one. If I was sitting up here talking to you about bravery and I was talking to you and I was looking away like this, I wouldn't be representing not only the brand, but also what it is that we're saying. So there's a lot of things that we want to get people involved in. One is our community language. A lot of people say, get comfortable being uncomfortable. This is one of the things I would say, I don't love. I don't want you to find comfort. I don't want you to seek comfort. I want you to seek discomfort. And when you know you're uncomfortable, even just a little bit, then you know you're pulling on all these things that require you to be brave, or to be doing something that you don't necessarily want to be doing, to be being resourceful. So when people are saying get comfortable being comfortable, we just want you to get uncomfortable. Like that's the way you know you're outside of your comfort zone. That's the way you know that you're stretching, improving, and particularly as an athlete, that's when it's hard, is when you know you're in the right place. Now, there's a whole other thing I feel like I should say with young people here. If you're injured, it's a different story, right? You're not trying to get uncomfortable in a way that's painful to you. This is about talking about like the discomfort that we seek as athletes who are trying to improve. All right, so let me just make sure I put it in that context. A lot of people say be fearless. No, people, we are hardwired for fear. We are hardwired for fear. Thousands of years ago, it helped us to like stay alive as a species. So the fear trigger is in us, right? To take any effort that you have to minimize your fear or to stuff it into your pinky toe is like a waste of energy. So we're saying like, no, be scared. be scared. That is when we know we're working in the right space. All right. So if you're scared, sometimes the best thing to say is, I'm scared. And just to acknowledge that it exists. And then you can start using all of these really cool things to be moving, to be in action while you're scared. Like, you're not here trying to figure out what to do when you feel great. You're here trying to figure out what to do when you don't feel great. And what Holly and I are going to really get to is how rowers seem to not feel great a lot. Why? Because you're training really hard, because you're up against, you're trying to get a seat in the boat. And then once you're in the boat, you're trying to figure out how to pull and work with everybody else, right? Holly will get into those details a little bit later. Everything we do at Brave is insight, mindset, action. You want to understand how you feel about something. So get into yourself, understand what your sense is about this, what your understanding about yourself is. How does that then like allow you to look at your mindset towards something, codify the approach in your mind, and then ultimately turn it into action? It actually isn't all that complicated. So insight, what is happening to me? Mindset, what are my untapped resources? How do I organize this? And like, what is my ultimate move as action? So let's talk about insight. I was a sick lacrosse player, people. I mean, doesn't it look like concrete slabs are just like slipped underneath my skin on my quads? That is me. 210 pounds when I was 22 years old to 28 years old. I made the USA team when I was 17. I stayed on it until I was 30 years old. I played in 2 World Cup championships. We brought the gold back for one. What? USA. Okay. So girl was good. Still hold the records for cause turnovers at Princeton University, where I went and did my undergrad. And people were like, you're awesome. You must be so awesome because you are so good at sports. And oh my God, you played at Princeton. Oh yeah, really? Well, I failed out of Princeton after my sophomore year. And ironically, after I became the first man or woman to score 50 goals in a season, this happened to me. And in that year off, I really figured out, like, I don't think confidence actually comes from being good at lacrosse. I'm starting to think confidence comes from like screwing up really royally in this like really big humiliating way. Had my tail between my legs. I had to like retrust myself, retrust my teammates had to retrust me. I had to go back. I decided to go back to Princeton. But in that year off, I started to discover this thing that was like growing in me, which I had a ton of confidence and belief in what I could do. I also had now a strong understanding of who I was. I knew that my confidence actually came from that big failure, but also from something I had been struggling with for a long time. That I thought a lot of people wouldn't be able to handle this the way I'm handling it, and that is depression. So when I was like 8 years old, it just came over me like a wave, and now I'm 44 years old. I've been struggling with it ever since, all through being a collegiate sport, a professional lacrosse player, a business owner. This is still current struggle of mine. It's where I get my confidence. If I can make it through every day, if I can make it through hard seasons, if I can make it through episodes, especially when the pressure's on, then getting into scary situations, being outside of my comfort zone, I have tons of resources. A lot of these resources I generated in that 1 year off. So I have to say, my history after college, as I was on the USA team, I traveled around and I coached, much like what Holly's doing with Ready, Set, Row right now. I coached lacrosse players from non-traditional lacrosse playing areas. So girls who were not from competitive areas, girls who didn't have the coaching resources, didn't have the playing resources, didn't have the game IQ. And what we basically found out, and this is where I first became curious, what is happening to girls between middle school and high school? Give me a BOOM in the chat right now. Just pull up your chat real quickly. BOOM, all caps, extra points if you got all caps in there. I just want to see some action in there. Give me a BOOM if you're in high school right now in the chat. Give me another shout out in there. BOOM if you're in high school. I'm trying to locate my chat. Not locating my chat. There it is. All right. So what I was seeing in our athletes, they still had really big goals by the time they got into high school. The problem was that they had a lot of things that were growing inside of them. Things that were looked like a lack of confidence, looked like, I still have my goal, Krista, but what if I can't do it? There was a concern of whether or not what the outcome was going to be. What if I try really hard, but it doesn't work out? Like, what if no one chooses me for college? And so we started to see this, like, the obstacles growing bigger and the capacity to manage those obstacles, resilience on one level, but resourcefulness on another, not willing to pull what they had together to counter it. We started to see this really affect kids. And I started to wonder, well, is this just happening to my lacrosse players between 8th and 9th grade? Or is this actually happening to kids? Or is this happening to women? And so what we were doing to compensate was we were teaching our athletes, and Holly and I talk about this a lot, to be honest with themselves, that insight tool, to practice outside of your comfort zone, not just play out there, but practice there, everything. How can you eat lunch and make it harder? How can you watch TV and make it harder? How can you watch TV outside of your comfort zone? You could watch a really scary movie in a house all by yourself in the middle of the night. Just saying, that's the way. And then finally, like with girls, I saw that there was this pretty gnarly like comparison confidence. I compare myself to you. You're so good. You're going to get recruited. And all of a sudden I feel deficient, right? So what we were doing was working on helping girls to see these awesome things in their teammates. And because they had access to watching them, they were able to pick and choose what they were going to add into their own game. So instead of me seeing Holly as awesome and that being a threat to me or a deficiency in me, I saw Holly as awesome, being like, I got front row seat tickets to figure out how I break down that skill and add it to my own game. These three things helped our kids get recruited to the top lacrosse playing schools without lacrosse playing IQ, without time in the game like their competitors. And we were really effective for 20 years. All right. But I also told you that I was sort of itching to find what is actually happening when their self-esteem seems to go down, their confidence was something. And what I found was this chart. Now I'll explain it a little bit. The top line is tracking boys from 8 years old on the left all the way to 90, 85, 90 on the right. The bottom line with the circles on it is girls to women. The middle line is the average. And I looked at this and I was like, oh, something very interesting is happening between those 9 and 22 years old, right? You see boys and girls taking a dramatic drop in self-esteem. Now, I didn't know that self-esteem was not what I was targeting, but this was good enough to describe what I was seeing. Can I get a boom in the chat or even a little teeny B if all you want to do is like, do you feel something after age 9 and wherever you are now, something happened in you where either you were more confused about things, maybe less confident? Anybody out there willing to put it in the chat? I think a lot of times people can sort of feel like something is happening in solidarity here. Like something happened where I didn't know. I got scared to raise my hand in class. I got nervous to go by myself to something. I got nervous to like say that I was good at something, or I didn't even think about to ever think that I was good at something really inside, or your negative voice grew inside, or you start to compare yourself to others more. A lot of these things. Okay, so this is what's happening. Now, interestingly, we'll stick on this point. What we found some similar things, but I can tell you what was really meaningful to me. Obviously, when I look at this as a data person, I can see that there's a dramatic drop for people ages 9 to 14. If you look closely, there's a little bit more of a drop after the age of 14. It's a little bit more subtle. You'll see it in our work. You can also see that top line that men and boys, they track higher their entire lives than girls. So not only girls do we drop dramatically in self-esteem, at the same time boys do, we drop way lower. It's a sharper drop. And if you can look finally, look at this long and slow recovery for all of us. Now on this graph, you see that men recover all the way back to where they were when they were 8 years old, looking at that peak point at the 65-year, you can see it's bigger than the other one, whereas women don't. Let's not worry about that for now. What I care about is that sudden drop. That seems crazy. And it seems like a lot is happening when you're young and already things are crazy. And then secondly, that long and slow recovery. So what Brave does is we help stop that drop and we help ignite a quicker recovery. But that's neither here nor there. When I think back to my own story, I thought, when I think about my career, if you pulled out grit, I'd still be a lacrosse superstar. If you pulled out teamwork or zest or love of learning or appreciation of beauty and excellence or love or hope, even optimism, I'd still be a successful athlete. But one of the distinguishing characteristics for me was really bravery. I was willing to go outside of my comfort zone and I wanted it. And I wondered why. And a lot of it is because I had confidence. Now, I wasn't always confident, but I had an internal core confidence. Much of it came from struggling with depression pretty effectively when I was younger. So it made me think, if this is happening with self-esteem, maybe we should be looking at things that seem to matter. Bravery, taking action when you're scared. So not getting stuck when other people do, not getting bogged down by that drop in self-esteem, and confidence, right? Believing in yourself. What if I looked at these two things? One of them and the other didn't seem like they were enough by themselves. So I looked at them all at the same time. What's really cool is what we found. I'm going to tell you what's untapped resources. We're going to get there in a second. This is our data. So that graph I showed you at first was somebody else's data who did a global study. This is the Brave data over the last 5 years. We've worked our butt off to work with 10,000 people. We've effectively measured 5,000 people for the purposes of this, but another 5,000 people for some from other data, and it corroborates here. And what we've seen, you see me focused on 22 ages 22 through 60 here in all that pink area, but you can see boys and girls, boys and men are in green and yellow, and girls and women are in red and black. And you can still see here between the ages of 9 and 22, there's a pretty dramatic drop. Right now, the boys aren't tracking higher than the girls the whole time. The men aren't tracking higher than the women, but we have this pretty dramatic drop from 9 to 14. It almost is the same. And then boys sort of recover a little bit and have a massive drop right after college age. Girls are sort of recovering, teetering and dealing. And then everybody slowly recovers between 9 and 22 and 65. Now, what I want to say here is not just that, oh my God, look, we see the same thing as the self-esteem data. Here's what is important. Bravery and confidence are nearly exact lines. Okay, the correlation here is high. It is so high. All the people we talk to in terms of data scientists and all the people that do our psychometric controls are like, this is insane correlation. So when I feel more brave, I also feel more confident. When I feel less confident, I also feel less brave. Why does this matter? Maybe you're like, of course, Krista. Really? Because the definitions for these words are different. We often have to convince people why bravery matters. But if I asked you right now, would you want to be more confident? If I had this jar of confidence water, would you drink it? Because you know that confidence is valuable. You know that it's something that's slipping out of your hands. You know that at times when you want it, you don't have it. You know that it's something that if you had, you do things that maybe you wouldn't do when you feel those moments of insecurity. So if I told you that bravery is a lever to pull core confidence up, like, would you go outside of your comfort zone more? I mean, what? We feel like we discovered this crazy thing. And that's essentially what our programming does. Now, if you're a really crazy data person, does anybody have any questions right now? If yes, pop it in there. If you're like loving what's happening, give me a BOOM exclamation point, all caps, something to let me know you're pumped about this. Let me see it. I love you so much. I do. Oh, I like all those O's. That makes me feel good. Okay. So let me go get crazy on this data. So just so you know, when I failed out of college, I failed 2 courses. One of them was Psychology 101. And one of them was statistics. Didn't stop me, people. That's right. It's what I do for a living. Okay, so I love data more than anything. Part of it is because as an athlete, I was cynical of everything. I'm cynical. I'm the most cynical person of our own programming. I'm like, there's no way this can possibly be this effective. And we dig and we dig and we dig and we try to find all the ways, all the holes that could possibly exist to make sure our programming is so effective. So one of the statistics we found is, I'm going to ask you this. Now, I don't want you to answer it in the chat. I want you to think about it in your head, okay? If I ask you, how confident do you feel compared to your peers? Do you feel more confident than your peers? Do you feel as confident than your peers? Or do you feel less confident than your peers? Have your answer in your head. We're going to go through some data in a second. Now, I said that already. If you feel less confident than your peers, oh my gosh, okay? Just so you know, you're not alone. I'll tell you the data in a second. If you feel less confident than your peers, your bravery and confidence scores will be anywhere between 20 to 70% lower than your peers who feel as confident or more confident than their peers, right? So that single data alone will indicate. Now, do you want to see how boys and girls differentiate between when we ask them that question? Here are the people who feel less confident than their peers. Look at the boys, okay? Young kids, young boys in middle school, 10% of boys would say they're less confident than their peers. In high school, 9% of boys would say they're less confident than their peers. You guys see the pattern here, right? 12% in college age men and 10% of adult men. So men don't change, right? 10% of men. Now I can tell you, for those 10% of men across the board who feel less confident than their peers, their bravery and confidence scores are also dramatically lower than their male peers. Watch what happens to girls. 9% in middle school feel less confident than their peers, just like middle school boys. High school, 20%. Now, 1 out of every 5 girls feels less confident in their peers. And what do we know this indicates? lower bravery and confidence scores generally. Look what happens in high school, 24%. And just so you know, we've worked with, this is what happens in college. So now 1 out of 4. We've had groups, high school and college groups, where 80% of the girls would say they were less confident than their peers during the pandemic. So we're looking at this closely to see if it shifts. And for adult women, it comes back down to calibrate, but we've also had adult women in the pandemic show at least 30%. So 1 out of every 3. But let's just say these are the averages. What? This isn't like a little difference. This is a big difference. In the data world, this is a dramatic difference. And this clearly shows there's a different track for girls growing into womanhood than there are for boys in this particular data question. Now, I will tell you something positive. For anybody, male or female, who does classify themselves as less confident than their peers and therefore has lower bravery and confidence scores, when they do our course, they get twice as brave and twice as confident in our 90-minute session. What? That's what I'm talking about. Those people who need it and want it, get it. So that's great. All right, let's move on. So when we think about our design, and this will go in, hopefully this piques some questions. This is not data. Now we're talking about, when we think as researchers, we've got this data, what could possibly influence these things, right? We could talk about like sort of nature, right? Biological. So estrogen and testosterone, maybe there's something in the boys, they call testosterone the courage hormone. Maybe as you go through puberty, this is having some sort of effect on you. Maybe it's what we focus on. You've probably seen a TED talk by Reshma Saujani, which is called Teach Our Girls to Be Brave Instead of Perfect. It's a great TED talk. Maybe Holly, you can find it and pop it in the chat. Okay, where she talks about how we teach girls how to be perfect, how to be good, how to be right, how to be present, how to be there, how to be perfect, versus we teach boys how to be macho, how to be decision makers, etc. And then, I'm a mother of a son and a daughter, and I read very compelling articles when women and men are parenting their children. If they have a male child, they're telling him to go for it on the monkey bars. When they have a girl child, they're saying, be careful. And I can tell you, I caught myself doing this many times. Why do I not think my son is going to get hurt on the monkey bars, but my daughter will? Period. So these are some of the things that could influence the drop and could influence the way girls classify themselves more as less confident than their peers. Now, what we see when we talk to adult groups is some of the effects when you look at, and those of you who are young girls right now, this is like how those influences add up to effects in real corporate life. Moms and dads, don't come at me. This is purely what we're not speaking to anything that's not been reported on. And again, this is what you see in the literature. This is also what you see in terms of how people market to us self-help. So women, the effects of these influences, the effects of feeling less confident than your peers, we apologize. We're less likely to speak up. We're less likely to self-promote. That is actually proven on many data studies. And we ruminate. Right? That means we never make a decision. We just constantly think about the same thing over and over and over again, wondering whether or not what's going to happen if we, but it never leads to a decision. This is what people call women things. Okay. What are called men things, whether you're a woman or a man, you're going to get classified in these ways. Oftentimes that men have emotional control. They take initiative, they solve problems, and they're risk takers. If you're a woman doing the men things, then sometimes you get called a BITCH. Sometimes you get called aggressive. Sometimes you get called ambitious, right? This isn't a conversation any of you guys are missing because it's happening around the clock. We are dealing with this. And what does this lead to, right? That's just things for you to think about, especially when you're getting in a boat and training. Let's talk about action. How do you move? If you're scared, okay, we want you to be scared. Krista said, I'm supposed to be scared. I'm supposed to seek discomfort. Now I know, if I thought I was less confident than my peers, I'm going to have lower bravery and confidence scores. Listen, we all got stuff going on. We're all here, especially tonight. We're definitely at Ready, Set, Row because we want to improve. We want to get better. And that's what I'm in the business of doing. What we found in our data, the last thing I'll show you that we found that leads to our action is that we found that kid fears are different than adult fears. If I asked you a couple things you're scared of in your head, think of a couple things you're scared of right now, just around you. Okay. You could, in your life right now, think of your day tomorrow, think of your week this coming week, think of your summer. What are a couple things you're scared of? Then if I ask you, okay, now great, think of all those things, but pick your one biggest fear right now, the thing that keeps you the most stuck. Right? What we found is that kids below the age of 10 would say that their biggest fears are physical fears, bugs, heights, the dark. I can kill a bug. I can turn on the lights if I'm scared of the dark. I can come down from the tall place. I have the agency as a young kid to deal with my fear. But when we see that between the ages of 11 and 13, those fears start changing and shifting to emotional fears, now my fears aren't on the outside. Now they're not threatening my physical harm, they're threatening my emotional harm, and they live inside me. So by the age of 15, a 15-year-old group is the same fear profile as an adult group. 15-year-olds showcase 80% of their fears reported, their biggest fears reported, are threats to emotional well-being or emotional fears. So this is pretty insane. The problem is when those fears, when you're 13, 14, 15 years old, and for some of you who sort of like go through this inflection point precociously, maybe you're experiencing at 10 years old, 11 years old, already to switch. If you're like me, I was certainly experiencing emotional fears far earlier. You can't use the same, you can't turn the like, you can't kill the bug of the fear of failure, right? You can't just like stomp on it and be like, it's dead. I'm like good now, right? You can't like turn on the lights when it's rejection that you're scared of. And so we are not equipped with a fear management system. And that's the crux of my work with Holly. Here is a fear profile. This is an adult group, but this is post inflection point. So a 15-year-old group would look the same, right? You can see the differential. I include this group because it has both women and men in it. So you can see that women tend to have a little bit higher emotional fear breakdown than men. And men seem to have a little bit greater mortality, so fear of dying. But this is it. 80% about emotional fears, and 10% less the physical fears and mortality fears. All right, so we know also that failure is the number one biggest fear. And actually for teenagers, it's like by far. So we oftentimes get these numbers up in the 80%. So for this particular adult group, right before the pandemic, failure was, they explicitly said, my biggest fear is failure or failing. Literally, that's what they wrote on their paper. But they also, in looking at all of our data really closely to do sort of like qualitative analysis, is that we saw that a lot of people were saying, what if my biggest fear is disappointing myself or others, not living up to my own expectations or others. And this is what we call something in the neighborhood of failure. So for this group, it's pretty actually chill in terms of numbers. You get about a third of the group saying that their biggest fear is something in the realm of failure. This is not uncommon. I would say for teenage groups, that number is way bigger. So what do we do with that? Now that we know that people who are less confident, that they classify themselves as less confident than their peers, also have bravery and confidence scores that are lower. We think about some of the influences that might be involved. We know that makes them excited to be outside of their comfort zone and doing our programming. We know that fears are shifting and most people have emotional fears, and that number one fear is failure. We then try to design programming that helps people practice failure. Right? We're getting a large swap of the group if we kept them to practice failure. But ultimately, even in practicing failure, what are we doing? We're trying to say this, and it all boils down to this. When I am afraid, then how do I brave? When I encounter obstacle, how do I take action in face of it? When I get stuck, how do I move? When I stop, how do I start? When I feel like, when I feel nervous, how do I take action? So we boil it down to that. So fear, right, is a big symbol for all the things that keep you stuck, and bravery is a big symbol for all the things that help you move. And that's the case for bravery. There's a couple reasons why I would say, in quick conclusion, why bravery matters. Is that one, we're hardwired for fear, as we already suggested. Two, we know that bravery and confidence are correlated. And these are really, really compelling reasons to start using bravery as a lever to increase your confidence and also practice outside of your comfort zone. Anybody who wants to be and grow as a person, as a professional, as an athlete, as a friend, figuring out ways that you can find pathways to understanding what mechanisms help you to move. That's what we're interested in designing a program for. So I hope that is helpful, at least to start and give you some context for the background. I don't know if you've received any questions. If people have questions, pop them in the Q&A. If you want to dig on any stuff, I'm going to just, as you talk a little bit, Holly, I can show you guys this real quickly. This is our logo, one of our logos. And this is really what bravery is made up of. Fear, obviously, doubt, hesitation, panic, and of course, failure is the number one biggest fear. So I'll leave you with that for right now while I find a little bit more data in case you want to ask about the data.
Yeah, so thanks, Krista. So awesome. So you guys pop any questions you might have in there. Krista has come to do an in-person Brave session. They were about 90 minutes in the past. We would do it on like the third day of the dev team, and obviously with the virus, and it involves a lot of handshaking. So for multiple reasons, we won't be doing it at this dev team and maybe the next one. But hopefully we'll do a virtual version of it, which she's been able to do for the last year and a half or so with folks, which has all, there's a silver lining. There's a lot of benefits actually for doing it that way too. So we'll do some more work on this. But I found it to be really, really effective, an amazing kickoff. I see Courtney on here, who, if she's willing, would love to have you come on, Courtney. Courtney came in what, 2019, Courtney?
Yeah, 2019.
So you were there. So give these guys like a little sense of, what it was like, because you did a 2K clinic with me too, but then you came to the dev team and met Krista in person. So give these guys a sense of like, do you remember anything you learned specifically from that, or like advice you'd give these guys going into the session and the camp to think about these character strengths as they go into the dev team?
Yeah, so something that I actually just recently experienced. So I recently got back into rowing. I had like a hiatus because of COVID. But so I'm actually coaching a team, and so I'm implementing a lot of what you've taught me, like all the time. And something that I've realized is that the pain and discomfort piece of basically what Krista talked about. I tell my athletes all the time that they need to be able to be uncomfortable, that discomfort is where they should live, and like sort of kind of these like little catchphrases like that. But it's shown like some pretty major, thank you. It's shown some pretty major like difference in athlete performance. And then just for me personally, I rode at regionals recently, and I took a missed stroke, and this is something that we actually talked about in the 2K clinic, but I took a missed stroke and it drastically like hurt our time, right? And so I took this stroke, and my first gut reaction was, oh no, like I messed up, I made a mistake. And then I immediately thought about, I have to move on. Because that was just something that I guess like has stuck with me this whole time. But the immediate like, I can't fix what just happened, I just have to keep going. And that, that reflects in a ton of different places in my life. But I would say for those of you who are like going to a dev team, first of all, you're gonna have an amazing time. It is literally an experience I think about daily, if not more. And the people you meet there and the friends you make and the things you learn will stay with you forever. And it's just like, it is amazing. I would be prepared, and I would encourage you guys to, we get, I still have mine, Holly, but we get these binders. I don't know if you're gonna still do this, but we get these binders.
Yeah, they're doing it.
Yeah. And so I would really encourage you to not only like read through the binder, but like fill it out, because we don't, at least for 2019, we didn't like fill out every sheet in the book. But I would really encourage you guys to like sit, because you'll have time in the dorms, so sit and like go through it and like really kind of like ruminate, not to use that word, but like really think about what is applicable in the camp, and understand that this whole month, right, still? Yeah, so this month will be basically this extremely safe place to experience this failure and make these mistakes and things like that, so that you can take those skills and those feelings and like use them kind of in the real world. I know it's real and it's about rowing, but it's like this very like, I hate the like safe place term, but like it's this very kind of, it's not comfortable, but it's a good place to practice doing that. With no like, there's no real like horrible consequences if you mess up. And so
thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Krista, I have a question for you actually about that. So some feedback I've gotten from previous athletes when I ask them at the end is, and one athlete gave me this exact analogy, which I think is totally accurate, and I'm not sure I can do much about it, but she basically said the camp is like we're shooting a fire hose of information at them. And like, it's so like, no one's ever even talked to them about these concepts that and it's sort of blowing them away. And, you know, we have a 70 to 75% success rate where people hit the target we give them, right? And a lot of times that's a PR if they come in fit, or maybe they were underperforming before or whatever, but they come out feeling fulfilled and satisfied after their 2K, right? And then there's 25% that don't. Like, we're not miracle workers, and they aren't. And my follow up with the 2 or 3 kids every year who don't hit it at camp, but do within 2 or 3 weeks, to be like, what happened? And this one athlete who you know, you guys, you'll know, pulled a 730 with me, and then pulled a 718 at 5'5" and like 132 pounds. I called her and I was like, what? You just pulled a 730 with me 2 weeks ago. How did you pull a 718? And she said, fire hose of information. And I kept my binder and I reworked it every day. And I felt like it was so much information I couldn't absorb and then like implement. So from your perspective, I know you talk a lot about retention and transfer. What can you tell them? Like, we're going to give them, I'm going to build this garden and like teach them, and we're going to plant all these seeds, and we're going to start watering. And now they got to take care of the garden, like when they leave camp.
Yeah.
So what can you tell them to both maybe make them not as scared to come to camp, like a little scared to be excited, but not scared like I can't do it? And how can they make sure they make the most of it so that they you know, can do it, can do the transfer piece?
I think the big piece is like accepting that you're really scared and saying that you're really scared and figuring out how you're moving with those feelings, as opposed to like spending any energy being mad at yourself about why you're scared, about being confused. You're scared because what you're about to do is really hard. You know it's hard. You know how hard it's been without having a really tough coach, or even if you have a tough coach like Holly is super tough. And that's great. And I also think there's like marination is like a big deal. Like we used to, when we did this, when I had this sort of the same business for lacrosse players, like we'd load kids up with information and we'd like be like, sleep on it, literally sleep on it. Like let your brain do what it's supposed to do. Obviously there's biological stuff of recovery and making sure that that's happening. But, a little bit like, I was going to say what Courtney said, but it's being scared and saying, what is it that I am scared of? Not getting a fast time, throwing up on the erg, like not making friends, like name all the things you're scared of, right? Keep that list. And what bravery really is, when I look at it, is not necessarily reducing your fear. It's growing your braveries to confront, to be the same size as your fear. So how can you create a bazillion different actions that keep you moving in the fear that you have, as opposed to an outlook that says, I'm going to ignore the fear that I have, or I'm going to try not to have it, or I'm going to make myself feel bad for having it. That is like step number one. Retention has a lot to do with a lot of things. Everything that we do in design has 3 things in mind. One, and I know Holly embeds this into her programming, but sometimes it depends on your visual learner, you're an audio learner, know that you may be absorbing and learning this stuff differently. And so take all the support from your coaches. But the first thing we do is learn. So you want to be learning everything that you possibly can from your coaches, any new experience, from your class, whatever. But then you want to be practicing it with the expectation in that practice. When you go from learning to practicing, the practicing is going to be filled with mistakes because it's your first time like understanding it. You're like, okay, of course, this is when I should expect to be screwing up some things here. Like every time I learn something new and I go try it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is like the best time, because like, I don't know, I'm just trying it. And then you move from practicing it, where you've made a couple mistakes, you know how to correct the mistake, you know how to like, the sort of game now and understand the rules, you know where to break the rules, you know how to, and you go from practicing with the expectations of being okay with mistakes, and you move into execution, where you are independently in the game on your own. You have the eyes you've learned, it's absorbed to the degree that you've practiced it, made some mistakes, and now you are in it, not with like, Holly still teaching it to you. You're like, it's gone through your system, and now you are executing, and you have established expectations for yourself, and you understand the expectations of others. And it doesn't mean they're not getting to you. It means like you are now operating with full personal agency. Okay. And so I think when you think of those 3 phases in your head, it's really great to like say, I think I'm still in the practice phase. I'm moving into the execution phase. And that may not be in the confines of the time that you're at camp. It just might not be. That is how I would highly recommend you start looking at understanding how to manage pressure, right? I'm learning, no pressure as I'm learning. I'm practicing pressure, but only because you need the information from each experience to the next. You need to know that if you screwed up to be able to figure out, oh, okay, well, I won't try A this time because that made a mistake. B, let me try B now. That learning part, that practicing part is all curiosity. And that execution is using the data from the practice time. Sometimes practice time is 2 months long. Sometimes it's 2 days long if you're just looking at one skill. You take all the data from that practice and you're like, now that I have enough information that I might call myself experienced, I'm moving into execution. And now if I make a mistake, like it's still just living in a world of like, okay, I made a mistake. It's still time is happening. Like I haven't turned into like a green person. And yet now the weight is higher because I know what different factors help me not make that mistake or help me press the same buttons, but to get me to a different place, right? You start to understand what a mistake is, what a risk is, based on the experience that you have. And so, you can break that down, and I know you guys will learn many different frameworks. You also have to realize that like when Holly's throwing at you a million things, she has to throw at you a bazillion different frameworks because not every framework hits every person, right? So you might hear her say something that like just doesn't fit with you. That's fine. That's fine. She's going to throw something else at you the next day. You're like, oh, okay, this makes sense to me. So when we say insight, mindset, action, insight, you are your own insight monitor. Yes, I want you to be open to things, but some things are going to be like, this doesn't work for me. Fine. Move on and be searching for something that does. And I know from working with Holly and I know from our stuff, most of our frameworks are getting at the same mechanism. When I fear, how do I take brave action? Period. But we have about 20 of them to get you to see the same exact thing, right? It catches different kids. We try to do the ones that are the catch-alls. But that's why the dev experience is so awesome because you're there consistently for a long period of time that the catch-alls starting to like run into each other. And then you start to do the coolest thing, which is you stack one framework that works for you on another framework that works for you, and blah, blah, blah. That's when you start to develop your personal system, either your fear management, action taking. This is you developing as a person, as a leader of self and ultimately of team. And that's why, if you ask me, it's critical that girls play girls play sports in high school and in college. Most importantly in high school, because it puts you in a way bigger category to be advancing in the corporate world. And there's a reason why. We start stacking frameworks that work for us and we get effective opportunity. We get to see where we're effective in our sport, whether it's an individual sport like rowing or whether it's a team sport, field sport like lacrosse for me. Hope that helped answer that.
Can you talk a little bit about how unless someone else has a question, someone had to leave, but was like, I love what you're doing. So they direct message me. Can you talk a little bit about the rowing? I know the rowing data we've done, you guys, is not random. Like it's a lot, all the dev athletes you guys are already sort of self-selecting a bit to recognize that like, this is something you want to work on. So you're not like a random sample, but can you just talk at a high level? Generally, I think we've found the rowers, at least the high school rowers we've done, which is mainly Ready, Set, Row, and then like a couple other teams have shown up lower than their peer groups. So like other athletes your age that play other sports in those metrics.
I have the data here. So I would say on average, like a Bravery score for let's say high school girls is at 6.55 out of 10. And in a 90-minute session, we can increase that to 8.27 out of 10. That's pretty awesome. There's a ceiling effect. So we don't get people much further than 8.27 0.27. And that's a 26% increase in 90 minutes of feelings of bravery. This, since we know that bravery and confidence correlate, I'll just say the bravery stats, the confidence ones are the same, 6.53 up to 8.46, 29% increase. So for Ready, Set, Row on average, you're looking at a bravery and confidence score over a point lower than the average high schooler. So we find that rowers have bravery and confidence scores way lower than the average female teenage athlete. And that was actually pretty dramatic for us to find. And we racked our brains. We then started to like very acutely work with college rowing teams. We found the same things for most college rowing teams. And we found it in men as well. It's still too little data for me to say like, oh my God, something crazy is happening. But it was enough to get Holly and I like looking at what are we creating in terms of the underbelly of the programming here that's going to support rowers as they like get on that erg, as they train by themselves, as they fight for that spot. And I can tell you though that the increases, so in bravery, because of kids who feel less confident than their peers and their bravery and confidence scores are lower, rowers, Ready, Set, Row the rowers tended to love our program. So our ability to impact them in that 90-minute period was just way higher. So like we go from 5.8 to 7.52 for bravery. That's a 29% increase. That's pretty gnarly. We got kids that we had averages around 19 to 20% increases, but check this out for confidence. Check it. 5.5 to 7.62, 38% increase in feelings of confidence in 90 minutes. It's insane. And, you know, again, I can tell you the groups, the anomalous groups, you know, but it's hard if you're not looking at all the data like I am. But so again, I think it's really interesting. We've had a number of conversations. I know Holly's talked to a bunch of Olympic rowers about this and tons of people in the sport. Why would rowers show up feeling less brave and less confident than girls their own age? It was fascinating to us. Let me see if I have, Holly, ask me another question while I just look through across this line to see if I can find the confidence.
Well, so I'll tell you guys, I had some, and I'm going to have some more because we have some amazing coaches coming either for the whole camp this summer or at least part of it as I sort of figure out how many people can we have support, because we have a lot of people that are interested, which is amazing. And it would be such a treat and such a privilege to have people that are, you know, have rowed at these high elite levels. But I have talked to several in the last year. And what I can tell you is at the dev team, I will never ask you to do something I don't think you can do. Ever. I will never say, just sit down and go after it. I'm going to be like, you know, Maeva, you're hitting this split. Do not go faster than this split. And in fact, I have been known to walk behind a rower who is like going off the deep end in the first 20 strokes and slam my foot against the back of their erg and start shouting at them to row the split I told you, because it's all calculated. Like I know what we're doing. And the reason people have these horrific experiences, or they would call them horrific experiences, is because they go too hard. And then it's ferociously uncomfortable and they have a long time to endure that. And it's like everything sort of spiraled out of control. So we back you up to sort of reset all of that. And it has to be done off the data, just like Chris was talking about. I need the data. And we calculate that. And when I talk to those Olympic athletes, one in particular, it wasn't an American Olympian, actually, it was from another country. And, you know, she's a multi-Olympian, okay? Like several Olympic teams. And I said, and she had a really tumultuous career emotionally and like mentally through her training. And I said, did you ever have a coach that told you this is the split to pull? And she was like, one in her like 25 years or 20 years of training. And I said, and what was that like when you had that coach? And she was like, that's when I hit my fastest times. It was like the totally opposite experience I had the entire time. And I was like, why don't more rowing coaches tell them the time? Like when I told Krista that I had so many coaches who didn't tell me anything, they just put me down that machine and were like, go till it says 0, 0. And like, I didn't know anything, you guys. So actually, if you don't know anything, it's not so horrible because you have no reference points whatsoever, what's good or bad. You just do it and then it feels bad, but you don't judge yourself because you don't know anything. And Krista was so shocked when I was like, no one told me a goal. No one told me what was good. No one told me what was a good idea to shoot for. I didn't know anything. And she thought that was so wild. And even in college, we'd be like 5 by 5 minutes, full on rate 32, go, 2 minutes rest in between. No, like split, just go as hard as you can. And so she told me that no coach had told her that. And when they gave her the data and they said, and this is what you can do, and it's still going to feel really uncomfortable, but you can hit this, then she hit it. And I asked her, in her experience, why didn't coaches do that? And she said, I think because they wanted me to pull like a 635, like the coach wanted her to. And so that's what we're trying to set up, right? Is the trust and the environment based on your performance and the data we have of your fitness level when you show up at camp, not what time you've ever pulled in your entire life. And so that then you can do it. And then we can keep ratcheting it up, right? As you're practicing these coping mechanisms, then, and we're like, I promise you, I'm correct about these projections. Then people are willing to risk more because it's based on data that they see. Someone's asking me about why do we think they have lower confidence? I mean, there's a bunch of things that I think happen, but I would say I personally feel like, as one of the coaches, and I'd be interested to hear what some of my coaches from previous year, I feel like I spent 30 to 40% of my time doing damage control on what other people in your guys' lives have said to you about your performance or capabilities or potential or something, right? Like I'm trying to unravel all that stuff to be like, let's just go back and look at the facts of like where you are and then where we think we're going to go based on the facts of where you are, not what I think you could be because you're 6 feet tall or whatever, or what I think you could be because you're 5'4". You know,
Can I say something, Hal? I
Yeah.
think like you made me think of one of the most effective frameworks that we used to use in lacrosse all the time, and I know you use it in your joint too. Is it like, especially for teenage girls, when you're looking to do the unraveling, and so there's unraveling for everybody, right? Like everybody has a thing. If you don't have a thing, great. Then you're not having a thing is a thing, right? Like it becomes a thing, and then you're like on the erg and you're like, oh my god, what's my thing? And then their thing happens. So I would say that like there's a really great framework if you're out there being like, I have these things in my head. Facts and feelings. Ali just said the facts. Like when you can say, okay, what are the facts of the situation? And what are my feelings about the facts? And parents who are on right now who have daughters who are sitting with them, like this is a great thing to everybody be talking about. Okay, so I feel like I rode horribly. Okay, well, let's look at the facts, right? Like the facts are that you rode a 7:15. I don't know anything, so don't anybody be like, 7:15 is the fastest or the slowest time.
you can come to the dev team if you can pull a 7:15.
Okay, good. That one time I was like, what's the 8 minutes? And you were like, it's okay. Right. So
8 minutes.
Right. So I feel like I rode really badly. It was a 7:15. Okay. But but the facts are like I was going for a 7:20, let's just say. Right. So a 7:15, that feeling based on the fact is like it's just misaligned. So a lot of times we see teenage girls having feelings not based on facts. And so we make decisions based on feelings we have that are not aligned with facts. So if parents or coaches can start to say, okay, let's try to identify facts here, and let's try to identify how we feel about those facts. And then let's try to identify feelings and see if any of those feelings have facts that we're making decisions on. It's become this really cool zipper. Like it's almost like, whoa, it's two different worlds, two different sides of a sweatshirt that's now been unzippered. It's not the same. And it can be really helpful. I wanted to go back, Holly, and say that rowers on average from Ready, Set, Row, 36% would identify themselves as less confident than their peers, which is why on average bravery and confidence is lower. If I go to the chat and see comparing yourself to others, I would say like that, if we know that compared to my peers, I feel less confident is a determiner of lower bravery and confidence scores. The way your sport is set up, it makes sense, right? But I would say that data is not about sense making. It's really, for us, it's about proving it. And Holly and I have not been able to yet prove. We've not been able to get enough compelling data that says, okay, like it's got to be this one thing about rowing. Now, I will have so much more data in about a month from now because we're working with USA Swimming. And so we're getting 500 female and male athletes between the ages of 10 and 19. And it'll be really interesting to see if another individual sport like swimming, right, if there's some of the same numbers. So that'll be fascinating.
In the chat, people are talking about the erg. I would tend to agree, and I'm psyched to see the swimming, right? Because a swimmer is similar to a rower in a lot of ways, except as the swimmer is swimming, and this is how they swim, right? As the swimmer is swimming, they don't have a screen telling them the rate at which they're swimming as they're swimming.
Right.
They know the time. They might have an idea if they're on target or not on target, but there's not something like you're not on target, you're not on target, you're not on target the whole time as they're going, which is what the erg does.
Yeah.
And so I do think that has, someone was asking, I think that I for sure think that has something to do. And let me mention something about, we're almost out of time, so I want to be respectful of that, but I want to comment on Chris's fact and feeling. And I also want to mention this about the erg. You guys have to remember, and I do this in the manual this year, it's the line of least squares regression. Okay, Google that. Are you impressed? I went back to my college like economics class to remember what that was. As you're training, you have many data points. They're not all ascending, right? What you have to make sure is that the line that makes the smallest distance between all the points is ascending, and it might be ascending very slowly, but you just make sure the line is. There's going to be plenty of data points below the line, and then there will be ones above. You will only remember the ones below, or the one radically above maybe. And so you assume the line is static or it's going down, and it's not, right? This is what even the Olympians will say, is like, it just has to be the line, it has to have a positive slope. It does not, your every data point will not be on the line. And as you get faster, it's even harder to do that because you're going to have even more data points below the line, right? So I do that in the manual this year, a little more detail because so many people had questions. And the other thing I want to mention about the facts versus feelings is at the camp, I will tell you what the facts are, right? So don't come off and be like, oh, well, this is bad. That's an assessment of the thing. I will, if you're rowing really bad on the water, we will tell you, but it's probably because you're just not focused, right? All we're looking for is attitude and effort. If we get those things, then like that is positive fact for me. And then if there's some technical things you have to work on, fine, but we can fix those things. But you have to bring attitude and effort, right? And so when people get off the water and I had a bad row, then I'm looking at attitude, not the facts of like, there's some technical things we can fix. By the way, there's technical things for everyone to fix, right? So we try to have you guys stop you being the coach and judging what's good or bad, and let us do that. And you just bring your positive attitude and best effort, and then we'll tell you what we need to work on. So
I'd say for me as a coach, just generally, and I'm a brave coach to kids, to adults, in big groups and individual, I would say that the one thing I love about the coaching I did for lacrosse and the data we have now, but the coaching we do for Brave is being around coaches, parents, teachers, people who want kids to like go out there and figure out how they can crush it. Like to want to crush it, to want to like get better, and to know that takes like going outside of your comfort zone, and to be like, yes, I'm like a scientist in my own ability to get better. Like people who want to facilitate that for kids who are like, oh my God, my coaches are legitimately like turbo boosters behind me. That doesn't mean they're not warm. It doesn't mean they're not demanding. Do you know what I mean? It means they're warm, demanding, which I've done a lot of work with Holly to be like, oh, she's a naturally demanding coach. And she's naturally warm. And so what you're getting is a mixture of, I love you like nuts, and I'm holding you to the expectations you have for yourself, right? That's my job as a coach. And I think that like when you can start getting, like, my biggest piece of advice is listen and take it in. Be a cynic too, especially because you're the garter of you're your own insight monitor. And the closer you can get with your coaches and the more trust there is, the more they can help you develop some turbo boosters when yours start to fizz out, as they will. You're going to be tired. But if you're scared, in the right territory. If you're trying to be less scared, wasting your effort. If you're basing everything on feeling, find the facts to be able to swing from your trees. And when you feel a big fear, know that somewhere in you is just, you got to be generating a ball of bravery just a little bit bigger than the fear. That's all you need. You don't need positive talk, but you just can't have negative. So get your negative to neutral. Again, I just literally said 10 different frameworks. So like, if you're like, I like the neutral thing. What's the neutral thing? Great. Go to camp and ask Holly about it. Is one of them. And like something today, like I'd love for you to put in the chat, one thing that just stuck out to you. Sorry. That was a lifting and I don't know what happened.
Stood out.
But put it in there. This is part of the retention and transfer. So as you're thinking about it, when Holly said, I'm obsessed with a retention and transfer, it's really important the way, the situation, and the environment in which you're learning something, in which something is coming into you, right? And that affects heavily the transfer of that information into your real life, right? Your job is to put yourself and understand how you are the best situation for you to be learning. Right? If you're a visual learner, then the visual stuff is going to matter, because you will more likely retain that information and then ultimately be able to use it. I don't see anything in the chat right now, people. So be putting stuff in the chat. What stood out to you today? Parents, you can put your own stuff in there. Where you like, I like that facts versus feelings thing, or I like that one weird thing you said about, I don't even know what. But here, this is one piece. So recording what you learned, even if it's just one word, like has huge influences on how you're going to be able to use that. And you guys have spent an hour on this call tonight. So you want to make sure that this is usable time. It has to have ripples in the water for you. It has to resonate. Great. Love it. Yeah. Yes. Good job. Yeah. Remember
I've only
that
had
fear
one
is an uncomfortable feeling alarming you to danger. That makes sense.
Yeah.
You feel like you're in danger. But we're not really like running from saber-toothed tigers anymore, people.
Yeah.
Right?
In all my time, I've had one person when I've asked, like, go back to a time when you were on the erg doing a workout and you thought you couldn't do it. And there was one person the whole time who said, Holly, I've never had that. And I was so taken aback that she said that. I was like, what? And then I don't know, it was a Harvard athlete at the time, a Harvard senior. And I don't even remember what I said, but if I could go back in time, my reaction now would be pull harder. What? You absolutely should have done a workout where you thought to yourself you couldn't finish it. In fact, all my Olympians say when they do their 2K at the 500-meter mark, if they think there's no way they can finish at that rate or at that pace, then they know they're on target. Like that's the cue for them to know that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, not avoiding a space where they have the fear that they are going to fail and miss. So anyway, thanks, Krista. How can these guys follow you, learn more from you, get in touch with you, etc.?
Yeah. We are coming out with our coolest stuff in about August. So for right now, you can follow everything that we do at Get More Brave, which is our Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all the things. You can follow me, Krista, at Krista Samaras. Following any of those will get you to us, but mostly anything that we do that's really cool, Holly will, I'm sure, promote. You can join our newsletter, which is the first way to find out stuff, and that's just going to our website, morebrave.com. Listen to our podcast. Let me know if you have any cool podcast guests you want me to interview.
Hey, I was one of them. Go listen.
Yeah, Holly was on it. You guys gotta listen to it. It's such a good one. It's such a good one. Oh my god. And listen to it. We just recently did a teenager, who runs her own business. Pretty amazing. Just to hear people who are your own age doing stuff. So we're on a little bit of a hiatus and we'll get back to it. But yeah.
Yeah, and if any of you guys
Pumped for you.
bought the One Way to Be Brave journal when you registered for camp, that's the book Krista wrote. So that's what you're gonna get. It is awesome. I still have some more. I'll bring some more in case you didn't get it and you want some. And I think she's got some on her website and some cool t-shirts like this one, which says this on the back.
I put my email address. So good. I put my email address in the chat if anybody wants to reach out directly. I'm here for you. My life is to support people. So if there's anything I can do, we can do as a company to support you guys crushing it. That's what we're here for. Yeah, pumped.
Thanks, Krista.
So welcome.